Hi, I'm Vladimir Penkrat, joining with you on our video series, our podcast, at Indegene. And we are joined by a couple of special guests coming to you from Trilogy Medical Writing and Consulting, is Julia Farjanik Klaproth, as well as Lisa Chamberlain James, who are both managing partners of Trilogy for a long-standing time. And I'm also joined by Tarun Mathur, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Indegene. I'm Vladimir Penkrat, and we're here to talk on medical writing meets AI, expert perspectives on transformative trends and best practices. Beginning the conversation today, obviously, medical writing has been around for many, many years, and the importance of that is an important part of Julia and Lisa, your experiences. That being said, AI has really taken form over the last year in importance and prominence. But the technology, in some respect, has been around for a long time. The concepts of content structuring, the opportunities to leverage utilities to assist the medical writer has all been part of the journey for a medical writer for many, many years. It's only AI that's come about in the last year where there's an opportunity to consider how to further advance that capability, where generative AI might even be able to assist the medical writer in some aspects of this. But with all of that in mind, obviously there's a level of potential concern that can come together from this as well. And so, Lisa, I'd like to maybe start with you from your perspective on this. Um, we need to recognize that the medical writer needs to continue to engage and operate in the considerations and decisions to what are best practices in medical writing. And so, how would you see this happening? What do you think are some of the important needs of a medical writer if they were to consider using AI in the medical writing construct?
Thanks, Blair. I think that's a very good question. And we all know there just aren't enough medical writers to cope with demand, which is a nice problem to have if you're a medical writer, but it's still a problem, right? And so, because there aren't enough of us, there's increasing demand, and everybody wants everything done quicker than ever. It makes total sense to turn to technology to help with this. And the main use cases I see, I think, are to help medical writers become more efficient. We can use technology to streamline our processes and mainly to take away the really monotonous, almost boring aspects of our job. And I hate to say that any aspects of my job are boring, but there are some very mundane, routine aspects that I'm sure we would all like to get rid of. So things like using a tool to automate summarization, tools for collaboration, which have been around for a little while now, and also auto formatting, things like that that are very routine, very mundane. Tools to do that would be really, really helpful.
Mm.
And the whole reason for that is that I think that this would allow us writers to do what we're really best at, to use our critical thinking and appraisal skills, to be able to guide teams and to help to craft really concise, well constructed, lean documents that really address the problem. So I really think that automation, if it's used correctly, it doesn't replace a good medical writer at all. It actually just elevates our role into what it really should be.
So that being said, obviously there's been a lot of discussion in the industry about AI, particularly generative AI, and how it's maybe applied. What are the concerns that you're hearing in the integration and usage of AI in today's world?
Yeah, absolutely. And the most obvious and most frequently voiced concern is always that the human is going to be replaced. And for some mundane task, let's be honest, that is, of course, true. The human will be replaced, and we should want that. As I've explained, in a resource constrained industry, that's actually a really good thing and allows us to achieve, as medical writers, our full potential. But I think no one with any sense would suggest that taking humans out of the loop in clinical development would make sense. Nobody with half a brain cell is going to say, "Yeah, it's a great thing. Let's give everything to computers." There are still too many issues around hallucinations and sourcing, and I'm sure Taryn will be able to speak far more to that than I can. But of course, there are also ethical considerations. We work in an industry that directly affects patients. And so the need for human oversight in that really cannot be overestimated and overemphasized. But I think, and I hope, that we are still a long way off from automating everything in clinical development and certainly within medical writing.
Mhm. And Tarun, that's a segue, obviously, where the consideration of both hallucinations and likewise the concern about automation potentially in some scenarios where companies want to try to automate everything. What are your considerations? What do you think are some successful strategies from the technology perspective?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with Lisa. We're a long ways away from automating things completely, and we could actually even argue whether we want to automate things completely. When we talk about medical writing, it's a large landscape, but we have boundary conditions. We are worried about risks and authenticity and trustworthiness of the content that's created. So we want to make sure we use the technology responsibly, and so putting in the correct risk mitigation factors is critical. Now, we certainly have seen the technology evolve, and right now we're going through a very exciting inflection point with generative AI. So we are seeing some opportunities get unlocked in terms of how we can actually take advantage of ground truth or trusted data sources in more effective ways. And there are techniques to help deal with issues such as hallucination. But I would argue that all of these should be in a human in the loop process where the
Yes.
human experts are actually curating and analyzing it. And basically, their time is being spent in more value tasks, remove some of the boring issues that Lisa had outlined. In addition, the technology unlocks other opportunities. So when we're talking about bringing on board a larger next generation of medical writers, having AI coaching assistants to help train and get writers in place more quickly and scaling that up, that's an opportunity, right? And using the technology to actually critique and analyze versus author, that's another area. Other thing we've seen in life sciences overall, and I think parts of medical writing we were seeing this, is that we're also realizing that in the future state, the consumers of the content that we're writing are also becoming automated systems. As you're creating documents, then you may actually have AI bots that are reading these. So we've seen, for example, in protocols, e-protocols. So we're thinking about even the structure of the content we're creating become codified a bit more because knowing that the end customer may be also AI augmented or assisted. So there's this evolutionary pathway where technology is not only there to augment the authoring process, remove some of the boring tasks, but also looking at the future state, knowing who our end customers are also going to be digitally enabled people. We're also rethinking our standards for these documents. So I think having these AI assistants, using AI responsibly, and certainly keeping in mind that the risks outweigh the benefits of full automation, that's the responsible way to use it in the boundary conditions of our landscape.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So that being said, Tarun, I think obviously that responsibility, the obligation there is an important aspect of this. So what are some areas where you are seeing applicability? I mean, certainly protocol is one, and the opportunity within the industry. We're seeing that data-centric approaches are taking form, both in protocol and other document types, is beginning to take shape. FHIR is a standard that's beginning to be adopted and discussed heavily in the industry as well. But in the more immediate, what are you seeing as some potential use cases that you might consider?
Yeah, so data synthesis and summarization using AI to assist that process. So we're seeing the ground truth data sources become more diverse and more federated. So in the AI landscape, we call these agents. Microsoft uses the term co-pilots, but these are basically autonomous tools that can go out and mine sources of information and come back and synthesize that, summarize that, point us to correct sources, and bring that to the author as reference material or as potential content, draft content into there and for the author to take a look at. So the ability for these agents to go and autonomously mine ever increasing landscape of complex data and federated data. By federated, I mean spread out across a universe of different sources, and bring that in a way for it to be summarized and used very quickly. That is certainly one. The other area where I see AI being beneficial is as you're authoring content, having that assistant look over the shoulder, looking at not only things like grammar and spell check, which we're all used to for the past couple of decades, but also validating that statements made are traceable to the sources that they came from. And so we talk about this technique called retrieval augmented generation in AI, which is basically when you have the AI try to respond to an inquiry, it goes and gets sources of truth from valid sources, ones that you've authorized, and it brings that back in and tries to summarize that back to you. So using that kind of technique properly is one way to actually mitigate some of these risks, but still augments the authoring experience in a pretty efficient way.
Yeah.
So Julia, this is interesting. I think Tarun's given some examples here where AI in some cases is also both delivering content but also reviewing content. That can be an exciting opportunity where obviously you can accelerate the process. But in some ways, then, is there a potential that AI may dictate or even bias the decision making of a medical writer in the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Vlad. And actually, it's a question that's been posed to me before when I've been speaking on this. I think to understand why that's not a concern, you have to understand what the tool is actually giving you. So ultimately, the tool is going to go in and pull information and present it for the medical writer to do something with. The tool itself doesn't make judgment calls, right? It's not deciding if something is right or wrong or what's necessarily clinically relevant. It's telling you if there's something that you should be talking to. And the medical writer, together with the clinical team, is going to look at that information and decide what the story is around those data points. So in a way, you could imagine it's the equivalent of if you took all of the tables that had been developed for your study report, and somebody sat down with a highlighter and highlighted all of the places where there were clinically relevant differences between the treatment groups for you, and then gave that to the medical writer. Are you biasing the medical writer? No. All you're doing is giving them the information they need to then decide what's the story of those differences. Are they relevant? Is that relative to what we've seen with other treatments in this indication? So really what it's doing is providing us with the information we need to then go away and decide what do we have to say. And in fact, I would even argue in a way that it's going to end up being less biased because software is objective. If you tell it to go and find a difference between treatment groups of 5%, it's going to pick out absolutely every single place where there's a difference between the treatment groups of 5%. I guarantee you, if you ask a clinician to go and find where there are differences that are relevant between treatment groups, sometimes they're going to go, oh, yeah, okay, that one looks different, but that's not so important. This is the important one. Humans are subjective. Computers are not. So in a way, I believe that these tools are there to help us get the information we need faster, more accurately, and consistently. And it leaves to us the intellectual part of deciding what is the story behind this. And that's what Tarun was talking about with the human in the loop. The human is essential in this. Nobody's designing these tools to produce something that's just used the way it is. They're being designed to augment what we're doing. Lisa referred to the fact that this is a completely resource-constrained industry. If we can speed up getting the information we need to understand what the story is, then we can sit and look at it and decide what does it all mean, together with all of the different SMEs.
Exactly.
So with that in mind, obviously getting comfortable with using the technology, understanding what its capabilities are, but also being mindful of what is the technology doing are all important aspects to this. So
Yes.
that being said, obviously, as I said at the very beginning, technology has always been there for medical writers. There's in some ways been an evolution of this over time. But what do you think now? I mean, knowing that the concepts and the potential of generative AI is potentially an area where we're going to see more of this, what are some skills that you think medical writers need to be conscientious of? What do they need to start to do differently to prepare themselves?
You know what? This is probably going to sound like a bit of a flippant answer, but